The morning sun rose gently over the small town of Riverbend, painting the streets with a warm, golden glow. Children hurried toward school, shopkeepers lifted shutters, and the sound of life slowly filled the air. Among the people walking through the busy streets was Marcus Johnson, a tall man with kind eyes and a calm presence. Marcus was known to many, but not in a loud or flashy way. He worked as a school teacher, spending his days guiding children through their lessons and reminding them to dream bigger than the town they lived in. Some students loved his lessons because he made them laugh. Others admired how he believed in them, even when they did not believe in themselves. Though Marcus had a gentle smile, he often carried quiet thoughts inside him. He had seen many unfair things in life, but he always chose patience over anger. His late parents had taught him that dignity was a person's greatest shield, and he tried to live by those words every day. That afternoon, the school day ended as usual. The children left with cheerful voices, and Marcus stayed behind to pack his books. He walked home slowly, enjoying the cool air of early evening. The trees along the road swayed softly, and the sound of crickets rose in the background. To Marcus, this was the best part of the day, when the world felt calm and he could breathe freely. But on that very day, peace would not last long. As Marcus crossed the main square, two police cars pulled up suddenly. Their flashing lights broke the quiet, and the sound of tires screeching against the road startled everyone nearby. A group of officers stepped out quickly, their faces firm and serious. "Sir, we need to speak with you," one of them said, his voice sharp. Marcus stopped, surprised. He looked around, wondering if they were talking to someone else, but the officer's eyes stayed fixed on him. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked politely, his tone calm, though his heart began to race. The officer stepped closer. "We've received a report. You match the description of a suspect. We need to take you in for questioning." A small crowd began to gather. Shopkeepers leaned out of their doors. Children whispered to their parents. Neighbors Marcus had greeted, for years now, looked at him with uncertainty in their eyes. Marcus felt a heavy silence inside himself. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he stood, surrounded by police as though he were guilty of something terrible. Still, he remembered his parents' words, dignity above all things. He kept his voice steady. "There must be some mistake," Marcus said softly. "I am a teacher at the local school. I was only walking home." But the officers did not seem interested in his words. One of them gestured toward the car. "Sir, please come with us. We'll sort this out at the station." Marcus hesitated. He could feel dozens of eyes watching him, eyes filled with judgment, confusion, and even fear. He wanted to shout that this was unfair. He wanted to tell the crowd he was innocent. But deep inside, he knew shouting would not change anything. Instead, he drew in a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I'll come with you," he said, his voice calm though his chest felt heavy. The officers led him to the car. As Marcus walked, he caught sight of a young boy from his class standing with his mother. The boy's eyes were wide with disbelief. Marcus gave him a small smile, hoping to ease the child's fear. But the boy did not smile back. When the car door closed, the sound echoed inside Marcus's heart. He sat quietly as the vehicle pulled away, leaving behind the crowd and the whispers that floated in the air. Inside the police car, Marcus stared out of the window. He watched the streets of Riverbend pass by, the familiar shops and houses that now seemed distant and strange. His thoughts raced. Why me? What mistake have they made? How will people see me now? The officers spoke little during the ride. Their faces remained stiff, as though they were certain of his guilt. Marcus wanted to explain again, but he realized his words would not be heard. At that moment, he understood something painful. Sometimes the truth is invisible when people are blinded by their own assumptions. The car finally stopped in front of the police station. Marcus stepped out slowly, his hands steady, his head held high. He would not let fear break his dignity. He walked inside, guided by the officers, feeling the cold eyes of strangers upon him. As the heavy doors closed behind him, Marcus knew his life had just changed. A simple evening walk had turned into something much larger, something he could not yet understand. But even in the face of confusion and unfairness, one thought kept him steady. The truth always finds its way to light, and with that belief, Marcus prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. The walls of the Riverbend police station were painted in dull gray, and the air inside felt heavy. Marcus Johnson sat quietly in a small chair as two officers stood nearby. He kept his hands folded in his lap, his back straight, his eyes calm, but alert. "Wait here," one officer said coldly before walking out of the room. Marcus nodded without a word. The room was plain, just a desk, two chairs, and a single light that hummed faintly above him. To most people, it would feel like a place of fear. But Marcus reminded himself to breathe slowly. He had taught children how to face exams without fear, telling them to trust in their preparation. Now he repeated those same lessons to his own heart. He thought of his students. Only that morning, he had reminded them to always be fair and kind, to never judge others too quickly. The memory of his words stung him now, because here he was, judged without reason. In another part of town, whispers were spreading. News of Marcus's arrest had moved quickly from the square to the shops, and from the shops to the homes. People who had once smiled at him now questioned what he had done. "I always thought he was a quiet man," someone said at the bakery. "Yes, but you never know," another replied. "He must have done something," a third voice added. The rumors grew, twisting the image of Marcus into something different from the truth. Some neighbors defended him, reminding others of his kindness, but their voices were softer, almost drowned out by doubt. Back in the station, Marcus sat still. A young officer entered the room and placed a file on the desk. He looked at Marcus for a moment, curiosity in his eyes, but he said nothing and left. Marcus noticed the hesitation in his gaze. It was not anger, not hatred, but confusion, as if the young man himself wasn't sure why Marcus was there. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, another officer entered and began asking questions. "Where were you this evening?" "Walking home from school." "Did anyone see you?" "Yes, many people saw me leaving the school." "Do you own a black jacket?" "Yes, I wear one often." It was cold today. Each question seemed designed not to learn the truth, but to push Marcus into a corner. He answered patiently, his voice calm and steady. He knew anger would only make things worse. Still, inside his heart, a storm brewed. He wondered how quickly life could change, how one misunderstanding, one assumption, could make a man's reputation crumble. He had spent years building trust with his students, with parents, with neighbors, and now all of that stood on shaky ground. When the officer left, Marcus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of his parents again. His father had once been accused unfairly at work, but instead of shouting, he had stood tall and proved his honesty through patience. "The truth has its own power," his father used to say. Marcus clung to those words now. Hours passed. Outside, the night grew darker. Inside, the whispers of doubt grew louder. Some officers glanced at Marcus as they walked by, their eyes filled with silent judgment. A few shook their heads. One officer, however, the young man Marcus had noticed earlier, lingered longer than the rest. He seemed unsettled, as if something about Marcus did not match the image of a guilty man. "Do you need water, sir?" the young officer asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "Thank you." The officer left and returned with a small cup of water. Marcus accepted it with a gentle smile. Kindness matters, even in small ways, Marcus said softly. The young officer paused. Most people would be shouting right now, "Why are you so calm?" Marcus looked at him. His eyes carried a quiet strength. Because anger will not show the truth, only patience will. The officer did not reply, but his expression softened. Before he walked away. Meanwhile, outside the station, Marcus's students sat at home asking questions their parents struggled to answer. One little girl said, "But Mr. Johnson always helps us. He teaches us to be honest. He can't be bad." Her parents looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The weight of assumptions pressed harder. Marcus could not hear the whispers, but he could feel their shadow. He knew the hardest part of unfair judgment was not the walls of a cell, but the way people's hearts could turn against you so quickly. Yet even in that heavy silence, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would not allow this moment to define him. He would not let bitterness grow inside him. Instead, he would let his dignity shine brighter than the false stories around him. As the clock struck midnight, Marcus sat alone, his hands still folded in his lap. His body was tired, but his spirit remained steady. He whispered a quiet prayer, asking for strength, not only for himself, but for the people who judged him without knowing the truth. For Marcus believed something deeply. One day, those same people would see not only his innocence, but also the strength of his character. And when that day came, the weight of assumptions would no longer hold him down. He closed his eyes again, knowing that the night was only the beginning of a larger journey, one that would test his patience, his faith, and his dignity in ways he could not yet imagine. The night inside the Riverbend police station was long and silent. The halls echoed with the sound of footsteps, doors opening and closing, and phones ringing now and then. But in the small room where Marcus Johnson sat, everything was still. He remained seated, his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him. Though his body was weary, his posture stayed tall. His eyes were steady, showing no anger, only patience. Many men in his position would have shouted by now. They would have argued, demanded answers, or pleaded for freedom. But Marcus chose a different path. He remembered his father's words, "Dignity is not given by others. It is something you carry within yourself." Every time the door opened, officers glanced at Marcus, perhaps expecting to see fear or rage. Instead, they saw only quiet strength. Some of them shook their heads, wondering how a man could stay so calm when surrounded by suspicion. It was this calmness that began to touch the heart of Officer Daniel Hayes, the youngest member of the team. Daniel had joined the police force with dreams of serving justice, but in recent months, he had seen things that troubled him. Sometimes people were judged too quickly, and sometimes mistakes were made. He often told himself he was too new to question his seniors. But something about Marcus made him pause. From the very first moment Daniel had looked into Marcus's eyes, he sensed honesty. Marcus's steady gaze was not the look of someone hiding secrets. It was the look of someone carrying truth, even if no one believed it. Late that night, while other officers exchanged papers and whispered among themselves, Daniel walked quietly to Marcus's room. He opened the door, holding a notebook in his hand, pretending it was official work. "You're still awake," Daniel said softly. Marcus lifted his head and gave a gentle nod. "Sleep does not come easily in a place like this." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Can I ask you something? Why don't you fight back? Why don't you argue?" Marcus studied the young man for a moment before replying. "Because anger is like fire. It may burn others, but it burns the one who holds it first. I would rather keep my spirit clean than fill it with flames." Daniel's eyes widened. The words struck him deeply, for he had seen too many angry faces in his short career. and never once had he seen such quiet dignity. "You really believe the truth will come out?" Daniel asked. "I do," Marcus replied calmly. "The truth is patient. It waits for the right moment to be seen." Just then, the sound of a phone ringing echoed from the main office. Voices rose in urgency. Daniel excused himself and left the room, curious about the sudden commotion. At the front desk, the senior officer answered the call, his expression stiffening as he listened. "Yes, he's here. Understood. We'll handle it." He hung up quickly, his eyes narrowing. Daniel asked, "Who was that?" "None of your concern," the senior officer replied sharply. He scribbled something on a note and tucked it into his pocket. Daniel frowned. He had been in the station long enough to recognize when something unusual was happening. Why would someone important call about Marcus Johnson, a school teacher? His curiosity deepened. Later, when things grew quiet again, Daniel returned to Marcus. "Someone just called about you." The chief didn't want to explain. Marcus simply nodded, his expression unchanged. Sometimes people notice what others do not, but the truth always has its way. Daniel sat down across from him. "Tell me about yourself, not as a suspect, but as a man." Marcus hesitated. He was not a man who liked to boast. He believed good deeds should remain quiet. Yet something about Daniel's sincerity made him share a little. "I am a teacher," Marcus said softly. "I guide children, not only in their studies, but in their dreams. Many of them have never been told they matter. I remind them every day that they do." Daniel leaned closer. "And outside school?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I spend time in the community. I help at the library. I visit the elderly who live alone. Sometimes I organize small food drives for families in need. But these are not things to be spoken of loudly. They are simply part of living with kindness." Daniel felt his chest tighten. How could such a man be sitting in a police station, treated as though he were guilty? He realized there was more to Marcus than anyone in the building understood. The door opened suddenly, and another officer entered. He looked at Daniel suspiciously. "What are you doing here?" "Just taking notes," Daniel replied quickly, lifting his notebook. The officer frowned but left without another word. When the room was quiet again, Marcus gave Daniel a knowing look. "Curiosity is a gift," he said gently, "but it must always walk with courage. Will you have the courage to seek the truth?" Daniel swallowed hard. He knew Marcus was right. Something about this case did not make sense. And though he was only a young officer, he felt a responsibility stirring inside him. As the clock ticked past 2 in the morning, Daniel returned to his desk and quietly opened his computer. He began searching Marcus Johnson's name. At first, he found simple things: articles about the school, a photo of Marcus with children at a science fair, a mention of his volunteer work in the town. But as he looked deeper, Daniel's eyes widened. There were reports from outside the town. Stories of a man named Marcus Johnson, who had spoken at conferences about education, who had been recognized for humanitarian work in other cities. He even found an old article hinting at a surprising family background. Daniel leaned back in his chair, stunned. This was no ordinary man. He glanced toward the room where Marcus sat silently, waiting with dignity. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of a hidden truth pressing against the walls of the station, waiting to be revealed. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the story of Marcus Johnson was only beginning. The night grew deeper, and the Riverbend police station was quieter than before. The streets outside were almost empty now, except for the soft glow of streetlights and the occasional passing car. Inside, most officers worked slowly at their desks, their eyes heavy with sleep. But Officer Daniel Hayes could not rest. He sat with his computer screen glowing in front of him, his heart beating faster as he read more about Marcus Johnson. Article after article appeared. Each one painted a picture very different from the image his colleagues believed. There was Marcus in a photograph, smiling with children at a community event in a larger city. Another article mentioned how he had once raised funds for a hospital in a poor district. A third spoke about a quiet award he had received for his work in education and humanitarian service. Daniel leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, "Why would a man like this be here, treated like a criminal?" He thought of Marcus's calm words earlier that night. The truth is patient. It waits for the right moment to be seen. Daniel realized the truth was already knocking at the station's door. Meanwhile, in the holding room, Marcus sat in the silence, his mind wandering to the past. He thought of his late parents, the lessons his father had taught about dignity, and the warmth of his mother, who had always reminded him that kindness was never wasted. He remembered times when he was younger, moments when life had been unfair, but he had learned then that fairness does not always come quickly. It takes patience. It takes faith. To keep his mind calm, Marcus began humming a soft tune his mother once sang to him. The melody carried him back to childhood evenings filled with laughter, books, and simple meals around the table. The sound was quiet, but it held a strength deeper than words. Out in the hall, Daniel passed by the door and paused when he heard it. The soft humming touched something inside him. It wasn't the sound of a guilty man. It was the sound of a soul at peace, even in darkness. He stepped inside. "You're awake still?" Marcus opened his eyes and gave a small smile. Sleep does not visit easily when the heart is heavy. Daniel sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel said, "I looked up your name." Marcus's expression did not change. He simply nodded. "And what did you find?" "That you are not only a teacher here," Daniel replied softly, "but someone who has helped so many beyond this town. There are stories about you, good stories. People respect you in places far from Riverbend." Marcus's eyes grew thoughtful. "Those stories are not mine alone. They belong to the children, the families, the people who stood with me. I was only a servant to their needs." Daniel shook his head slightly. "You don't talk like any man I've met in this station." Marcus chuckled faintly. "Perhaps that is because most men in this place are judged before they are heard, but I have nothing to hide." Daniel leaned forward. "Then why keep so much of your life quiet? Why live simply here when you could have used your reputation?" Marcus looked at him carefully. "Because true service does not need a stage. I came here to teach, to live quietly, and to help where I could. Recognition is not important. What matters is the work itself." Daniel felt his chest grow tight with respect. He had joined the police to protect people like this. Yet somehow, the man sitting in front of him was the one who needed protection. Just then, voices rose in the main office. The police chief had arrived unexpectedly, his face tense as he spoke with the senior officers. Daniel stepped out quickly to listen. "Orders from above," the chief said in a low but firm voice. "We are to handle Marcus Johnson carefully. Very carefully. I don't want any mistakes here." The senior officer frowned. "But he's just a local man, isn't he?" The chief shook his head. "No, he's more than that. I can't explain everything now, but you'll understand soon enough. For now, do not treat him harshly. Do not make assumptions." Daniel's heart leapt. His suspicions were correct. Marcus's identity carried weight far beyond the town. Something bigger was hidden beneath the quiet surface. When the chief left, Daniel returned to Marcus. "Things are changing. The higher officers are giving instructions about you. They know who you are." Marcus closed his eyes, breathing slowly. "The truth always waits for its time." The young officer watched him closely. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Marcus smiled gently. I knew that patience would reveal what words could not. The world often rushes to judge, but time has its way of correcting what is false. For the first time since his arrest, Daniel felt hope rising inside him. Something was shifting. The picture of Marcus that the officers had built in their minds was beginning to crumble. That night, Daniel returned to his desk but could not stop thinking. He thought about his oath to serve justice. He thought about Marcus's calmness, his humility, his words that carried wisdom like an old book filled with truth. And in that quiet station, Daniel made a silent promise. He would not let Marcus be forgotten or broken by false judgment. He would help uncover the truth no matter how hard it became. Back in the small room, Marcus closed his eyes again. Though he was still inside the walls of the station, his spirit felt free. He believed that soon the truth would step into the light. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this night was not just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been judged too quickly, everyone who had ever carried the weight of assumptions. His story would speak for more than just himself. The truth was coming, step by step, like the first rays of dawn waiting just beyond the horizon. The first light of dawn touched the windows of the Riverbend police station. The long night had finally passed, but the air inside still felt heavy. Officers moved slowly, their faces tired, their voices low. Yet, beneath the quiet, there was a strange tension, as if everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Marcus Johnson sat in the same room where he had been all night. His back was straight, his hands rested gently on the table, and his calm eyes carried no sign of anger. He looked like a man waiting not for rescue, but for truth. Officer Daniel Hayes, still restless from the discoveries he had made overnight, walked toward the chief's office. He wanted answers. Inside the office, the chief was already speaking on the phone. His voice was firm but respectful. "Yes, sir. Yes, we understand. Of course. We'll handle it with care." Daniel waited until the call ended, then stepped forward. "Chief, who is Marcus Johnson? Why are higher authorities giving orders about him?" The chief looked at Daniel carefully. "That is not for you to worry about, Hayes. Just do your duty." "But, sir," Daniel pressed gently, "this man is not who people think he is. The town believes he's just a school teacher. The officers think he might be guilty, but he's more than that, isn't he?" The chief sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're right. He is more than that. But the less you say, the safer it is for you. Understand?" Daniel nodded, though his heart demanded more. He could not ignore what he had already seen, the articles, the recognition, the quiet respect Marcus carried wherever he went. Meanwhile, outside the station, the town was waking up. News of Marcus's arrest had already spread further. Some people gathered near the building, whispering, curious about what would happen. Many still doubted him, but others began to question. Why hasn't he been charged yet? Why so much silence? Back inside, Marcus remained steady. He did not ask questions. He did not protest. He simply waited. To him, patience was not weakness, it was strength. By mid-morning, a black car pulled up outside the station. Its polished surface reflected the bright sunlight. Two men in suits stepped out, their presence quiet but commanding. They walked straight into the building, asking for the chief. Whispers filled the hall as officers turned their heads. Few visitors ever arrived in such a manner. The men entered the chief's office, closing the door behind them. Minutes later, the chief himself walked out, followed by the suited men. His expression was serious as he gave orders. "Bring Marcus Johnson to the main office immediately." Two officers moved to obey, though their faces showed confusion. Why so much attention for a man they believed was just a teacher? Marcus was led into the larger office. The suited men stood waiting, their eyes filled with respect as they looked at him. "Mr. Johnson," one of them said warmly, "it is an honor to meet you again. We regret the trouble you have faced here." The officers in the room froze. Their eyes widened. Again? Did that mean these men already knew Marcus? Marcus gave a small nod. No apology is needed. The truth always reveals itself in time. The senior officer, who had doubted Marcus the most, stepped forward, his voice uncertain. Who exactly is he? The suited man looked at him firmly. You do not know? This man is more than a teacher. He is a nationally respected humanitarian, recognized for his work in education and community service. He has advised leaders, built programs for children, and touched lives across many cities. Even the president himself knows his name. The room went silent. Officers who had treated Marcus with suspicion now stared at him in shock. Their earlier doubts crumbled like sand in the wind. Daniel felt a swell of pride rise in his chest. He had believed Marcus was more than he seemed, but even he had not imagined the full truth. The senior officer's face grew pale. He remembered the way he had dismissed Marcus's words, the way he had ordered him around without care. Guilt pressed heavily on his shoulders. The suited men continued. Mr. Johnson prefers to live quietly. He has chosen humility over recognition. But do not mistake his silence for weakness. His influence reaches far. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but clear. I never wanted titles or attention. My work is for the children, for the families, for the people who are often forgotten. That is enough for me. The officers lowered their eyes, unable to meet his gaze. The chief cleared his throat. Mr. Johnson, on behalf of this department, I apologize deeply for what has happened. Marcus shook his head gently. Do not apologize to me because of who I am. Apologize to me because I am a human being who was judged without cause. And remember, every person who walks into this station deserves the same dignity, whether they are known or unknown. His words cut through the air like a light breaking through clouds. The officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing the truth in what he said. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel spoke softly, his voice full of respect. He's right. We must treat everyone fairly, not just the people whose names carry weight. Marcus turned toward him and gave a gentle smile. Thank you, young man. Your heart is open to the truth. That is a rare gift. The suited men prepared to leave, but not before assuring Marcus that this misunderstanding would be corrected publicly. The nation will know what truly happened, they said. As they stepped out, whispers filled the station. Officers who had once looked at Marcus with suspicion now looked at him with awe. Some felt guilt, some felt shame, but all were changed. Marcus walked slowly back to his chair, still calm, still steady. Nothing in his manner had changed, even after the revelation of his identity. He was still the same man, humble and patient. But now, the world inside the station had changed. The officers no longer saw just a teacher. They saw a man of dignity, a man of influence, a man whose quiet strength had shaken their assumptions. And for the first time since his arrest, the heavy weight of judgment began to lift. The morning sun poured through the windows of the Riverbend police station, chasing away the shadows of the long night. Yet, inside, the officers felt a different kind of light, one that came not from the sun, but from the truth they had just learned about Marcus Johnson. The man they had doubted, questioned, and judged was no ordinary figure. He was a teacher, yes, but also a humanitarian, a man respected across cities, even recognized by national leaders. The revelation had shaken every officer in the building. Marcus himself remained unchanged. He still sat with the same quiet posture, his eyes calm, his voice steady. The weight of judgment that had pressed upon him seemed to fall away, yet he carried himself with the same humility as before. The police chief stepped forward, his voice low and respectful. Mr. Johnson, we are deeply sorry for the way you were treated. We did not understand who you were. Marcus lifted his eyes, meeting the chief's gaze. His words were soft, but they carried power. You apologize because of who I am. But would you apologize if I were just another man, unknown to you? That is the question you must answer for yourselves. The room grew silent. Every officer felt the truth of his words. They realized that their treatment of Marcus had changed only because they had discovered his reputation. But the real lesson was larger. Every person deserved dignity, whether famous or forgotten. Officer Daniel Hayes, the young officer who had shown kindness to Marcus, spoke softly. He's right. Respect should not be given because of status. It should be given because every human being deserves it. Marcus turned toward him and smiled warmly. You understand, Daniel. True justice is not about who a person is in the world's eyes. It is about seeing their humanity. The senior officer, who had been the harshest in his judgment, lowered his head. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. I treated you unfairly. I assumed without listening. I let my own ideas blind me. I am ashamed. Marcus studied him quietly before replying. Shame can be heavy, but it can also guide you toward change. Do not let guilt break you. Let it teach you. The mistakes of today can become the wisdom of tomorrow, if you are willing to learn. The words struck deep. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, others bowed their heads. For the first time, they were not just facing a man they had arrested, they were facing a mirror of their own actions. The chief, moved by Marcus's calm dignity, asked, "What do you want us to do now, Mr. Johnson? How can we make this right?" Marcus paused, his voice thoughtful. Do not focus only on me. Focus on the next person who walks through your doors. Treat them with fairness. Listen to their voice before you decide their fate. That is how you can make this right. The room grew still again. His words did not accuse. They did not burn with anger. Yet they carried more weight than any shouting ever could. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He realized he was witnessing something rare, true forgiveness. Marcus was not seeking revenge, nor was he demanding special treatment. He was offering wisdom, even to those who had wronged him. Forgiveness, Marcus continued softly, is not forgetting what happened. It is choosing not to let bitterness control the heart. I forgive you, not because I must, but because anger cannot build a better world. Only understanding can. The officers listened, their expressions softened. The harshness in the room melted into something different, something close to respect. Outside, the crowd waiting near the station was growing larger. Curious voices asked questions. Some expected to see Marcus walk out angry, others expected drama. But what they would witness instead was something far more powerful. Before leaving the station, Marcus requested one thing. Allow me to speak, not for myself, but for the lesson this moment can teach. The chief agreed, and soon Marcus stood at the doorway of the station. The crowd fell silent as he appeared. His tall figure carried no pride, only quiet strength. My friends, Marcus began, his voice gentle yet clear. I know many of you have heard rumors. You may have believed things that were not true. That is the nature of whispers. They spread quickly, but they do not always carry truth. The people listened closely. Some lowered their eyes in shame, remembering their own doubts. Marcus continued. Yes, mistakes were made here. I was judged before I was heard. But I want you all to understand, this is not only about me. This happens to many people. Every day. We are too quick to decide, too slow to listen. Let this moment remind us to see each person with fairness, not with assumptions. A murmur spread through the crowd. Parents who knew Marcus as a teacher nodded with tears in their eyes. Students who admired him looked up with pride. I hold no anger, Marcus said firmly. I choose forgiveness, but I also choose to speak the truth, that dignity is not a gift for the powerful, it is a right for every human being. The words touched the hearts of everyone listening. Even those who had doubted him now felt a stirring inside, as if a heavy curtain had been lifted from their eyes. As Marcus finished, silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, people began to clap, not because he demanded it, but because his words had reached them. It was not applause for a hero. It was applause for a lesson that had awakened something in them. Back inside the station, the officers stood by the windows, watching. Some felt their throats tighten with emotion. They knew they had been changed by the man they had wronged. "Officer," Daniel whispered quietly to himself. "This is the kind of strength the world needs. Not power, not pride, but forgiveness." And in that moment, Marcus Johnson was no longer just a man who had been arrested without cause. He was a teacher. Once again, not in a classroom but in life itself, reminding everyone that justice begins not in the law but in the heart. The next morning, Riverbend was different. The small town that had once whispered rumors now whispered something else. Marcus Johnson's name with respect. The story of his calm strength and forgiveness had spread quickly, carried by the voices of those who had stood outside the police station and heard his words. For many, it was hard to believe that a man who had been treated so unfairly could walk away with such grace. But Marcus had done exactly that. Instead of anger, he had chosen understanding. Instead of revenge, he had chosen forgiveness. The police officers, too, were changed. The chief gathered his team that morning and spoke with unusual softness. "We were taught a lesson yesterday. Not from a book, not from training, but from a man we wronged. Let us not waste it." Some officers nodded quietly, others kept their heads low, still ashamed. But one thing was clear: they would never look at their work the same way again. Officer Daniel Hayes, the young man who had shown kindness to Marcus from the beginning, felt both proud and humbled. He thought about Marcus's words. "Respect is not earned by fame. It is given because every human being deserves it." Those words stayed in his heart like a seed planted in rich soil. Later that day, Marcus returned to his school. His students greeted him with wide eyes and excited voices. They had heard what happened, and many of them had been frightened for him. But when he walked into the classroom with his usual gentle smile, the children rushed to him. "Mr. Johnson," one of the younger students cried. "We were so worried." Marcus bent down to meet their eyes. "Do not be afraid, children. Worry changes nothing. What matters is how we respond to what happens. We must always choose the path of kindness." The classroom grew quiet. Even the restless ones listened. They knew their teacher had gone through something important, and they felt proud to learn from him. That afternoon, a small group of townspeople gathered outside the school. They wanted to see Marcus, not to question him, but to thank him. Parents came with gratitude in their voices. Elders came with tears in their eyes. A few even admitted their doubts from before. "We judged too quickly," one mother said. "But you opened our eyes." Marcus listened patiently, nodding. "The past cannot be changed," he told them gently. "But the future is always waiting to be shaped. Let us shape it with understanding." The people agreed. Slowly, the community began to see each other differently. Conversations grew more thoughtful. People became slower to judge, quicker to listen. Marcus's example had planted a seed not only in the police but in the whole town. Days turned into weeks. Newspapers carried the story beyond Riverbend. Writers described how a simple teacher had changed hearts by refusing to meet anger with anger. Some called him a hero, but Marcus never accepted that title. "I am not a hero," he told a reporter once. "I am only a man who believes forgiveness is stronger than bitterness. The lesson is not about me, it is about all of us." Meanwhile, the police department made real changes. The chief introduced new training focused on fairness, patience, and community respect. Officers began visiting schools, listening to students, and speaking with families. Their uniforms no longer created fear in Riverbend. Slowly, trust began to grow. For Officer Daniel, the experience shaped his entire future. He began studying not only the law, but also human behavior, determined to become an officer who stood for fairness in every action. He often remembered Marcus's calm words and carried them like a compass in his career. One evening, months later, Marcus sat outside his home on the wooden porch. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold and pink. Children's laughter floated from the street, and the scent of fresh bread from a neighbor's kitchen filled the air. As he watched, he thought about everything that had happened: the arrest, the questions, the doubt, and finally, the truth. He knew life would always bring unfair moments, but he also knew something greater. Every unfair moment was a chance to show the world a better way. His sister, Grace, joined him on the porch. She had been one of his strongest supporters throughout the ordeal. Sitting beside him, she whispered, "You changed them, Marcus. You changed all of us." Marcus smiled softly. "Perhaps. But remember, Grace, it was not me they saw. It was the power of forgiveness. That power does not belong only to me. It belongs to anyone willing to use it." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, comforted by his words. She understood now what made her brother special. Not fame, not recognition, but his quiet strength that inspired others to be better. As night settled, Marcus looked up at the stars. He felt peace in his heart. The pain of his arrest had faded, replaced by something far more valuable, a new respect, not just for him, but for the truth that every person deserved dignity. In Riverbend, people began to tell the story of Marcus Johnson to their children. They told it not as a tale of suffering, but as a lesson of hope. They reminded the young ones that respect was not a reward for status. It was a gift we must give freely. And so Marcus's name lived not in shame, but in honor. Not because he had been famous, but because he had remained true to himself when the world tested him. He had turned pain into teaching and judgment into growth. He had given his community a new way to see. And in that way, Marcus Johnson's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who chose kindness over bitterness, understanding over judgment, forgiveness over hate. It was not the story of an arrest anymore. It was the story of a teacher who showed the world that the strongest man is not the one who fights, but the one who forgives.